now. The first presentation, which will be on taxonomy and tree names. Then after that, we'll have some question time, and we will then go to just some observations about urban forestry, some things as they're being done up here in Seattle. For those of you who missed the introduction, my name's Mike Kuhns. That's my picture in the upper left, and I'm sitting in my rental house in Seattle. I'm on sabbatical here for a year with the U.S. Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station and their Urban Natural Resources Stewardship program here with Dale Blana, an old friend of mine. I also, but I'm normally in Logan, Utah, and I'm the Forest State University. I want to thank the Forest Service for hosting me up here on sabbatical. Also, the U.S. Forest Service State and Private Forestry Group out of Region 4, they helped with the tree browser development that we'll see near the end of my presentation today. And then Nolan Runquist, who is the Seattle City Arborist for Seattle Department of Transportation, went out with him yesterday and got some insights into urban forestry here in Seattle. Okay, so I'm going to get on with the slides. First, I'll talk about tree taxonomy and tree names. I don't know if this was a pressing subject for everyone or not, but it was something that fit the time frame we had. I think it's the kind of thing people could always use a refresher on. I got a refresher when I wrote some things I had forgotten since school. And it's just important for our professional development, I think, to know these things. Okay, so taxonomy then is the practice and science of classification. Tree taxonomy would be the classifying of trees and not classifying them by leaf color or height or shape, but classifying them botanically. And usually that botanical classification is done by the anatomy of the tree or the plant, and in particular, usually flower and fruit anatomy, the reproducing parts of the tree. Sometimes vascular system is involved and other anatomical and physiological features, but usually it's flowers and fruit. Now, identification classification is different than classifying botanically. We use things like opposite and alternate leaves, those types of things, to help us identify plants, but that's different than sorting them out taxonomically. And it's useful to know taxonomy because often there are ecological and management similarities up at the family level and below, sometimes even above, but especially down in the genus level. We classify because humans are classifiers. It helps us make sense of our world. I think you walk in a room, you start to look at the objects in the room or the people in the room and think how they're classified. Knowing tree taxonomy lets you predict what a tree will look like. So if you know you have, say, a maple, but you don't know what kind of maple it is, you know something about it taxonomically then, that it's in the genus Acer, and you'll know something about what it's likely to look like, though not as much as if you knew the species. You might know something about how big it will get because certain genera or families tend to stay small, how they'll react to their environment, and so on. The more precisely you classify taxonomically, the more precisely you can predict these things. So for example, using maple again as an example, if you know you have a maple, genus Acer, that tells you a little bit about the tree's appearance, what it's likely to look like, some other things like possible drought hardiness, pH tolerance, but there's a lot of variability within the maple. it's hard just by knowing it's a maple a lot about it. You know something about the appearance of it. It's going to have opposite leaves. It's likely to have lobed leaves, and the fruit will be samaras. But you don't know a whole lot more than that necessarily. So we've got a couple of kinds of maples shown here. On the left top is the big tooth maple or Acer grandidentatum. Its samara is on the left, and it's got some similarities to the silver maple, right, but also lots of different. So knowing it's an Acer helps, but it's not enough. Knowing it's a canyon maple, then, the maple that we've got, tells us something about, much more about its drought and soil pH tolerance. We know that often, usually, it's got a good fall color, and we know it's a tree that's kind of a shrubby tree often, but that shape is somewhat variable. So we know a little more by knowing that it's a species. We don't know everything about it because there's genetic variation even within the Acer grandidentatum species. So all these pictures are various views of parts of Acer grandidentatum. And we know it's likely to look like that tree on the right, especially in the wild. We know even more if we know the cultivar of the tree or the variety. So in this case, there's one named commercial source of Acer grandidentatum, that's Rocky Mountain Glow, canyon maple. It turns out it has a kind of so-so fall color, and it's a pretty reliably upright tree. Its fall color may have to do with the fact that it's grafted onto usually not sugar maple, red maple, Acer rubrum stocks. Acer rubrum isn't as well adapted to our climate as canyon maple is. So, and that's a cultivar produced by Schmidt. And we'll get back to each of these terms in a minute. So this is a small, newly planted Acer grandidentatum uh, with uh, the cultivar, Rocky Mountain Glow. I've got a comment here, getting hard to hear some words. Can you speak directly into the mic? And Aaron messages me privately that he's lost sound. Let's have people, I've moved my microphone a little bit to try to help. Let's have people go to the attendee list to the My Status box and select thumbs up if your sound is basically okay. It's not going to be perfect. This isn't perfect technology. Okay, we're getting some indications. Okay, I guess, and select thumbs down if your sound is bad. Of course, if your sound's too bad, you can't hear this. Oh, where's the thumb? It's at the top of the attendee list. There's a My Status drop-down bar. Clear that, and there's a bunch of choices. Or click on that. There's a bunch of choices, including thumbs up, thumbs. Okay. So mostly thumbs up. I see one thumbs down, Joel. Just see one thumbs down. Okay, so I'm going to go on. I'm going to clear that status for all of you. Let's see, I think I can do that. And somebody said it's much better, so that's good. Let's see. Well, I don't know how to clear the status, I'll let Livy or Darren do that. Okay. So this is a Rocky Mountain Glow big tooth maple, Acer grandidentatum, shown here. So taxonomic levels then, there's a lot of levels above family, genus, and species, and usually I don't deal with them much, and I'm not going to deal with them after this one slide in this talk, but I just want to show you there are multiple ways of doing these classifications, but here's one of them anyway. The kingdom is kind of the upper highest level, and that's in the case of plants, it's called plantae or plants. These are Latinized names, kingdom plantae. Uh, the maples, this is all for maple and for big tooth maple in particular. Um, so the division is Magnoliophyta for the maples, and that's the angiosperms or the flowering plants. Class Magnoliopsida, the dicotyledons, the dicots. Subclass of maples is Rosidae, and there's many orders within that. All of them have more or less showy flowers. It's in the order Sapindales. All orders end in ALES, and that's pronounced Ales. And there's many families in the Sapindales that include the citrus, cashew, etc. So maples are related to those, citrus and cashew. Family of maple, now we're getting close, is Acer acei, named for the Acer genus that the maples are in. There are two genera in the Acer acei. It's the Acer genera and Dipteronia. Genus, I should have said. There's genus of the maples is Acer. There's 120 species of maples in the Acer genus worldwide. Species is Acer grandidentatum. That's for canyon maple or big tooth maple. And the variety of that one in particular is Rocky Mountain Glow. Okay, so we'll focus then just on family, genus, species, and variety for the rest of the time. Okay, so family. I want to mention if you do have trouble with sound, considerable trouble, not just an occasional word lost or a little bit of static, you can go ahead and use the chat pod and mention briefly your trouble. And if you want, you can select with the drop down in the to box, you can select to presenters only or to Darren McAvoy or Olivia only, and that'll message just them. Okay, so on with the talk. The family plants always ends in ACEAE. This is the Latinized name for the families. That's pronounced ACE. Generally in Latin names, at least of plants and animals, uh, you pronounce every syllable you could make out of a word. So in this case, ACE would be the pronunciation. Usually there's also a common name related to a family. So the Acer ACE is the Acer, or includes the Acer genus, and it's the maples. So it's the maple family, it might be called. Even though this is a Latin name, you don't italicize it by convention. And it's named for the most typical genus. So Acer ace would be the Acer or maple genus. That's what the family's named for. The Pinaceae is named for Pinus, the pines, but also includes Abies, Picea, Larix, the firs, the spruces, and the larches. Fagaceae is named for the Fagus genus, beeches. Also includes very important Quercus, which is Castanea chestnuts, and the Cupressaceae is another example. It's named for the Cupressus genus, but includes the cypresses and also Juniperus, Chamaecyparis, Thuya, Calocedrus, all sorts of other genera. And the family level sometimes is useful to know if I've got something in the, say, ash family, that olive family, we call it, that is going to have some characteristics similar to something else in the olive family. Uh, and an example would be here, these photographs. We've got white ash or Fraxinus americana on the left, autumn purple cultivar. We've got some lilacs in the middle, and we've got fringe tree on the right. That's Fraxinus genus, Syringa genus, and Cheonanthus genus, all in the same family, the Oleaceae, which is the olive family. And they have some common characteristics that help us know how to manage one or the other. In this case, they all, of this family, all of them are fairly drought hardy, they're shade intolerant, and they all, at least the first two here, happen to be borer prone. Uh, how prone it is to borers, but at least in our climate, these are fairly borer prone, but obviously ornamental. The family, Cupressaceae, also has some common characteristics between its genera, with Cupressus on the left here, the Arizona cypress we're seeing pictured on the left in St. George, and the junipers in the middle, planted in Salt Lake. Those genera have some fairly common traits in that they're very drought hardy and shade intolerant. But on the other hand, it shows how you can't always assume everything in a family is the same, because the Thuya occidentalis on the right, the northern white cedar, is not very drought tolerant. Genus, now we're getting closer to the level of a species, individual species. Genus is the word that's used singular. Genera is if you have more than one. Usually, again, there's also a common name for a genus. So the Acer genus is the maples. Um, it's always italicized, and the first letter is always capitalized. An example would be witch hazel, is the common name for the genus Hamamelis in the family Hamamelidaceae. And you can see it's spelled there, spelled out with a leading capital letter and all in italics. By the way, that family is in the is the same family as sweet gum. Genus or genera are much more likely to be have in common cultural and ecological significance, so that if you know you've got an oak, you know something about it. The oaks in this case shown here on the left is Gamble oak, in the middle is bur oak, and the right is white oak, Quercus alba. All have a common characteristic of being fairly drought tolerant and heat tolerant, fairly shade intolerant. Um, and the oaks generally are fairly drought tolerant. They're also very strong wooded. Firs, the Abies genus, also have some significant commonalities between species. The picture on the left is a subalpine fir, one of our native firs. Our other native fir in the middle there is white fir or concolor fir, Abies concolor. And on the right is Abies Principio, Spanish fir in the Murray Arboretum. And although they're not identical to one another in shade tolerance and a love of moisture, they're pretty similar that way. It would go from left to right, with the one on the left being the most shade tolerant and most moisture loving, and the one on the right being the least, but they all are share those commonalities. And willows always are fast growing, Salix genus, always are fast growing, shade intolerant, need moisture, and in planted landscapes at least always end up being insect and disease prone. So if you know something about the genus, you know, even though you may not know the species you have, you know a lot about its characteristics and how to manage it. Species then uh, is where the rubber meets the road. And species, the word species is always done with an S on the end, no matter whether it's singular or plural. So I have two species of plants, or I have one species of plant. I know it sounds awkward to say what sounds like a plural name when you're talking about one species, but the word species only refers to coins and currency, not to plants. It's always combined with the genus. It really isn't very meaningful, for example, to go into a big room and say, hey, Mike, are you in here? When there might be 10 Mikes. When I was growing up, there would be. Um, it's not useful unless it's combined with a last name so that Mike you're looking for knows who you're looking for. Same way with plants, although the names are reversed. Pinus, for example, in Pinus virginiana, Pinus would be like a last name and Virginiana like a first name. Um, okay, did I say that right? I think so. Because there's also, you wouldn't just say, I've got a Virginiana here, because it could be a Pinus, it could be a Quercus, and there are a number of other species where the species name is Virginiana, but there would be different genus names. It's always italicized or underlined, never capitalized, even if it's a proper, derived from a proper name. So Virginiana, even though it's named for Virginia, is not capitalized. And often species names, the Latin names, end in two I's, and that's pronounced EI or E. So Quercus, let's see, Chinkapin oak would be pronounced Quercus muhlenbergii. And species obviously is very ecologically and culturally significant. All Abies concolors, white firs, are tolerant of shade, but less tolerant than all Abies Laciocarpa, subalpine fir. So if you know species you've got, you really know a lot about its culture, its management, what it's going to look like, all sorts of things. Those two names then, genus and species, are put together in what's called the Latin or scientific name, and often it's called a binomial, a two-part name. Genus and species together make the name that sometimes is shorthanded, just called species, but it's implied that it's the genus and species together make up the species name. So Pseudotsuga menziesii is the full species name or binomial name or Latin name for Douglas fir. It's Latin. Latin is used in these names for consistency. Latin is a dead language, doesn't change much. So once you agree on a Latin name, things stay pretty stable. Not entirely, as we'll see in a minute, but there's one agreed on name for each species, one agreed on scientific name for each species. And the Latin is taken from features of the plant or geography of where it comes from or the discoverer or other characteristic. Pseudotsuga menziesii, for example, pseudo is false. Tsuga is the genus name for hemlocks, true hemlocks. So Pseudotsuga together is false hemlock. And Archibald Menzies first described the species, therefore the name Menziesii or Menziesii. Now, you don't see it all the time. Mostly you see it in scientific publications where people are trying to be very clear on what species they're studying. There's something often called an author or citation that comes after the binomial name. And it's the person generally who most recently named the species, and then there are some complications as well. For example, with Pseudotsuga menziesii, afterwards, if you had the current citation, be Merb, period, in parentheses, and Franco. Merbel named the species. That Merb is a shorthand for Merbel. And then Franco revised the classification into some varieties. Douglas fir has a coastal variety and an inland variety. And the names get quite complicated sometimes. Sometimes they're very simple. But often you won't see these in day-to-day use of even the Latin names. Cultivars and varieties we see a lot, especially in urban forestry, urban landscapes. Sometimes they're Latin or Latinized words. Sometimes they're not. They may be italicized, but they shouldn't be. By convention, they should not be. And generally, they're in single quotes after the species name. And we'll have examples in a second. So it may have the abbreviation CV for cultivar or VAR for variety in front of it. So like Populus tremula, CV erecta would be, I think it's called Swedish aspen, and there's an upright variety of it seen growing in Salt Lake. But erecta would be the cultivar name, but the CV isn't needed. Uh, these subdivide the species into subclassifications based on maybe crown shape or leaf color, all sorts of different characteristics. And cultivar stands for cultivated variety. It's generally cultivated true to form, so often it'll be grafted material or rooted so that it's genetically identical. So for example, this Acer saccharum, which is a sugar maple, variety columnar, is a columnar variety of or cultivar of sugar maple. This one's growing in Salt Lake. Another example would be Catalpa bignonioides. Try to say that 3 times fast. Cultivar Nana. Nana is a common cultivar name when you have a dwarf variety. This is a special kind of dwarf that's grafted onto an upright stem, and it's a dwarf variety of southern Catalpa. This is in Salt Lake. Thuja plicata zebrina is a zebra striped variety of western red cedar. This one happens to be in Seattle, but we can grow this in Utah. And Chamaecyparis piscifera, golden mop, is a shrubby, weepy, yellow-colored variety of saguaro false cypress. And again, this would be probably grafted or possibly rooted so that it's genetically identical. You had 10 of them, they're all genetically identical to one another. And there are a number of common cultivar names that have to do with color, crown shape, size, and some other features. So for shape, for example, stricta is used to describe very tight crowned, upright forms of crowns. And there might be lots of different species that would have a variety stricta associated with them. The Oculus draconis, which is shown here in this photo, is a variety of Pinus densiflora, which is Japanese red pine, and it's called the dragon's eye variety of red pine, Japanese red pine. Hybrids are genetic crosses between two species, usually in the same genus, but not always, and they're indicated in the Latin name by an X, usually between the genus and species, but not always. These can be human-made hybrids, or they can be natural hybrids where the plants co-occur. So some kind of famous hybrids, for example, an interspecific hybrid between two different species in the same genus is the cross between silver maple, Acer saccharinum, on the lower left, and red maple, Acer rubrum, in the upper middle. Combined together, certain crosses have been made and selected and make the new species Acer X freemanii, which doesn't, well, may occur in nature because these species do co-occur geographically, but freemanii would not be a normal species you'd find in nature. And autumn blaze is a particular selection. You can imagine if you have 100 different silver maples and 100 different red maples and do crosses between all of them, you've got like 10,000 possible crosses you're going to come up with, hybrids. And if you select 5 of those to cultivate and sell and give a name to, one of those might have been autumn blaze. And there are other freemanii crosses with other cultivar names. Autumn blaze has been a very popular cultivar, but it's one I worry about because of the silver maple it has in its heritage. A really famous and common in Utah hybrid is London plane tree, and it's another interspecific hybrid in the Platanus genus, a cross between American sycamore on the lower left and in the upper middle oriental sycamore, and that makes for London plane trees. And again, there are different selections of Platanus X acerifolia, like Bloodgood, for example. Another common cross, again, between two species in the same genus is a cross between lily magnolia and Ulan magnolia, which makes the tree form saucer magnolia, Magnolia X soulangiana, which is really common in Utah. And then finally, we'll end with an intergeneric hybrid. So this is a cross between two different species in two different genuses or genera. Monterey cypress, Cypressus macrocarpa, is crossed with Nootka cypress, Chamaecyparis nootkatensis, and that makes Leyland cypress, which is a fast-growing, kind of nasty, frankly, evergreen that's used a lot in the southeastern U.S. for Christmas trees, but is common in Utah here and there, has been planted a fair amount at least. And it's denoted with the X in front of the Latin name, so X cupressociparis leylandii, and cupressociparis is not a genus that occurs in nature. These plants don't co-occur together geographically, so they haven't crossed naturally. It's a human-made cross. Finally, down to common names, which we all are mostly familiar with and mostly use. There's many names for one species. That's the problem with common names. You need to be clear what you're talking about. So Pseudotsuga menziesii, Douglas fir, is called Douglas fir, hyphenated, Douglas fir not hyphenated, implying that it's a true fir, which it's not. It's not in the Abies genus. It's called red fir, it's called red pine, probably wood color related. All of that for one species, probably has many other common names as well. And that leads to confusion sometimes. One name can refer to more than one species, like red pine can refer to Pseudotsuga menziesii, Douglas fir, but it also is the common name for Pinus resinosa in the lake states of the U.S., which is also called red pine. So these vary regionally and can be very confusing. I had a call when I was a new extension forester in Utah from a sawmill in the Uinta Basin, wanting to know about, I think he called it red pine. And it took a while till I realized he was talking Douglas fir. It's fine, we communicated finally, but it can add clarity to use Latin names, at least be able to converse with Latin names. Pine is a word that's often used by people to describe any evergreen. They'll say, I have a sick pine in my front yard, and the first thing I have to find out is, what do you mean? Do you have a spruce, a fir, a juniper, or a pine? Box elder is not a true elder. It's a maple. Red cedar isn't a true cedar, nor is it a true juniper. Well, sometimes the name's used for juniper, sometimes it's used for a Thuya genus. And then red maple is used for everything that's maple-ish that has a red leaf to it, or even a purple leaf. Generally, if common names are hyphenated or run together, it is meant to indicate that you have a misleading common name. It's more than one word. Like Douglas hyphen fir indicates it's not a true fir. Box elder is run together, indicating it's not a true elder. Mountain ash, the same way, hyphenated to indicate it's not an ash. And finally, to wrap up this topic, I just want to make the case for you. I know Latin names can sound uppity and academic and snobbish, but I think that knowing them and being ready to use them is useful for clear communication and makes a person seem professional. Um, and I don't mean to overplay that. It's fine to use common names. I don't talk Acer rubrum. Somebody calls me about their red maple, but if I tell them to go to the nursery and recommend a particular species, I always try to include the Latin name so that they know when they go to the nursery and ask for a red maple, they don't get a Crimson King Norway maple. Um, Hopefully the tag will say Acer rubrum on it, and hopefully the nursery person will be ready to deal with knowing what an Acer rubrum is, or it can be looked up. You know, you don't see mechanics say, hand me that whatchamacallit wrench so I can take off this thingy here, at least not good mechanics. And doctors as well know what they're talking about, and we need to know what we're talking about too. Okay, there's my contact information. The phone isn't staffed until July when I'm back, but that email address is still good.